So today we take a special look at the crisis at Eskom as Newzroom Afrika. In fact, this week, the power utility informed South Africans that load shedding is here to stay for about 5 years, I think. In fact, businesses and households have already been struggling as a result of these rolling power cuts. For perspective on how we should respond to this moment, we're in a conversation with our news editor, Dianne Hawker, to take a look at the Eskom issues. But first, let's listen in to what Eskom COO Jan Obelholzer had to say earlier this week when addressing some of the issues at Eskom. Take a listen.
I'd like to highlight 3 power stations: Tutuka, Duva, and Kusile. Now, these 3 power stations really is challenging at this point in time. It's performing extremely poorly. But there's dedicated focus on how to turn this around. And if we can solve this, we're talking about 2,300 megawatts that we can add. And if you take a load shedding of stage 2, 2,000 megawatts, if we fix it, and when we fix the performance of these 3 stations, specifically Duva and Tutuka, then we will move forward quite a lot.
All right, so as mentioned, Dianne Hawker, our news editor, joining us now on the roundtable here on the AM Report. And Dianne, perhaps let's start with what was said by Jan Obelholzer there. Those 3 power stations were meant to kind of save us from this moment. Turns out they brought in even more problems.
Well, that's correct, Ayanda. You know, what we've been seeing over time is probably a perfect storm of problems at Eskom. There's been overspending on the new power stations, which has been Medupi and Kusile. A lot of the old power stations are outdated, or they haven't had sufficient maintenance in the time that they've been in existence. In that same press conference, Jan Obelholzer mentioned that some of the power stations are as old as 45 years old, which in generation terms is considered quite an old power station, and you have to start considering whether you phase that out or how you upgrade it. In addition to that, we also know that there have been a number of management issues at Eskom, and throughout the day, we're going to be taking a look at how, not only what the issues are, but also how they've been affecting South Africans over time. Now, one of the things that we also want to look at is really how this whole situation started. Right. You know, we are now at a moment where we've been living with load shedding for 13 years, which means that a child who is now entering high school has always understood that there's something called load shedding.
Wow.
And that really is the kind of perspective that we want to talk about here. In 2008, I'm not sure if you will recall, you know, the issue of load shedding was something that was elevated to a very serious national level. NERSA actually did an investigation behind the reasons of it, because it was seen as a major crisis and something that Eskom should address as a matter of urgency. Here we are 13 years later, still dealing with something that should be addressed as a matter of urgency. And that's quite a big concern for many South Africans who have to find themselves spending additional resources to try and keep themselves with power, and even with small business owners, who are some of the people that we plan to speak to today, as to how are they actually coping. It means that sometimes they have to turn away clients, and other times it means that they will have to spend additional resources to have generators running on their premises. Right. So it is a real issue in South Africa, and one that is actually a crisis.
And an issue, no doubt, that deserves all the attention it's going to get. What is equally difficult to digest, Dianne, of course, is that prediction that we might have to stay in this position for an additional 5 years?
Yes, exactly, which would put us at close to 20 years with an irregular power supply. Right. And the thing that I think we shouldn't forget, really, in remembering this Eskom story, is that, you know, when the issues were brought up in 2008, and when we started experiencing load shedding, this had actually been something that had been spoken about by Eskom leadership as far back as 2004. I remember when I was living in Cape Town and reporting as a reporter there, and in the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee meetings, there were always conversations about the fact that South Africa urgently needed to address its power supply concerns. Medupi and Kusile were eventually built, but as we heard in that soundbite, Kusile is one of the power stations that is not performing well, and it's actually quite frustrating, I would say, to many South Africans, because also the cost of Kusile it's not been a cheap power station. It was initially budgeted at 81 billion rand, and those costs have gone up to 161.4 billion rand just for that one power station. And there are some serious questions for Eskom as to when they will actually be able to get that power station and the others performing optimally so that we can get out of the situation of load shedding.
Absolutely. So that's just the foreground of our focus on Eskom today. Make sure to keep it locked to Newzroom 405 as we continue fleshing out these issues. Dianne, we'll speak to you once again at the top of 7 o'clock, get you a different aspect of our ongoing coverage around the crisis at Eskom. Dianne Hawker is our news editor right here on Newzroom Afrika.